Hi everyone, today's video is a pro tip on how to get a greater percentage, i.e. a better score, in your dressage test. So what I've got here, I've got a prelim 1.3 and this could be any dressage test. It could be any level, any horse, any rider. The principles are the same. So this test I chose because it's all the movements are on one page, and it's going to be easier for me to explain to you. If any of you want to follow on, print yourself off a prelim dressage test and you can get a feel for what I'm talking about. So this test has 13 movements. So in order to increase your score, lots of people focus on getting higher marks, going for the 8s and 9s and 10s, but really it's not about going for the 8s and 9s and 10s. Would you be happy with a 65? Would you be happy with a 70 or a 75? So to get a 65 or a 75, all you have to do is get 6.5 all through your test and you'll get a 65 at the end. To improve the score of your next dressage test, I'm going to talk about how to change your thinking. And most people, when they write a dressage test, they're aiming for the high scores, 8s, 9s, 10s. And the chances of getting, an 8 or a 9 or a 10 aren't that great. You've got far more chance of getting a score right in the middle of the range. But that's okay, because you can still get a very good score in the middle of the range. 65 is in the middle of the range, 75 is, at the higher end of the middle of the range. And I think there'd be lots of you out there who would be happy with a score like that. So what you want to think of in your test, and when you're analysing your test sheets as well, is in order to increase your score on your test, instead of aiming for the higher marks, think about increasing the lower marks. So here we've got a prelim dressage test. It's got 13 movements and it's got a pretty good range of scores. So we've got an 8, a 7, a 5.5, 6.5, 6.5, 7, 7.5, a 6, a 5.5, a 6.5, a 7, a 5.5 and a 6.5. Now that, including the collective marks at the end, totaled a high 62%. So for this test, if I was having a look at the test sheet afterwards, or if I was planning my next dressage show and thinking about how to improve my marks, what I want to do is I want to eliminate all the 5 marks. So if you can, all the movements that received a 5.5, you want to make those movements better. And really, that's what you should be practicing at home in preparation for your next show. So how many 5.5s did we get? 1, 2, 3. So we got 3 lots of 5.5 here. And just for interest's sake, the collective marks were 7, 6.5, 5.5, 6.5. And you can't do much about those marks without really improving this here. So by improving the first page of your dressage test, you are automatically going to improve the second page. So we don't analyse the collective marks in great detail. We look at them, read them, take them in, but this page is like a summary of what the judge saw overall. So we've got 3 lots of 5.5 here. And I would like each of those to be much higher. If I'm aiming for a 65, I would like those to be 6.5. If I'm aiming for a 70, then I'd like them to be 7, and so on. So the movement, so I'm having a look at the movement. It was number 3, between A and F, working canter left lead. Now this was one of the very first tests for this horse, and so his canter wasn't that established. So he didn't receive a very good score for his canter. And then, funnily enough, if we go down, the next 5.5 is the working canter right lead. So this horse, this is starting to paint a picture. The horse isn't, terribly well established in canter. The horse is just starting out, and and he's received a score that correlates with that. And then the last 5.5 was for the stretchy circle, the circle right 20 metres, rising trot, allowing the horse to stretch forward and downward. Now a lot of riders also struggle with that, and so do and if a horse gets tense at a show, that's where you would expect it to show up. So for a horse starting out with in one of his first dressage tests, you know, that's fairly understandable. So we've got 3 lots of 5.5. So I would go home, practice those things, so the canter and the stretchy trot, make sure I practice them a lot and practice them within a test, you know, when I'm practicing my test at home. And in that way, you should be lifting those 5.5s, and I would aim, the next test I went and did, I would aim for those to be all 6s. And so just by doing that, I'm lifting my whole test score by 1.5 marks, which is, in prelim, one mark is worth quite a lot of percentage because there's only 13 movements. As the tests get higher, you get more and more movements. Like in the novice, I think there's 20 movements in some of them, and so on. So for each mark in your prelim, it's worth more of a percentage point, and you get more bang for your buck, in other words. So for this one, you know, he received an 8. So an 8 is possible, especially for that movement. And that was down the centre line and halt salute at X. An 8 is entirely possible. So, you know, while he might not get that every time, you know that he's going to nail that. But if we go down the bottom to the last movement, which is down the centre line and the final halt, he got a 6.5 for that one. So there's a 1.5 mark difference. So for those 2 movements, I would then expect anywhere from 6.5 to 8. Every time he goes in. So those movements are pretty much guaranteed. And you know, and in this way you can go through your dressage test, like the loop he got a 7. Let's see what the other loop got. If I go down here, the other loop, it got a 6. So by that stage, and the comment says more forward, some tension. So by that stage, the horse had, you know, was starting to get a bit tense, or maybe he was getting a bit tired, you know, first test. And it's always good to think of the context as well. If this was an experienced horse coming back in and there was tension, you would be looking at different reasons for that. Yeah, so in that way, you know, I know he can get a 7 for the loop. So I would be aiming to make each loop as good, you know, each loop as good as the other one, so that score can be a little bit better. And yeah, and so that's how I would go through my test, and I would look at where those areas that he could improve, lift those low scores. So instead of aiming for the really high scores, lift my low scores, and that's a great way to improve the score in your dressage test and your final percentage, and ultimately your placing. So I hope this pro tip has helped you out, and I look forward to seeing you again. If you like the video, don't forget to click on the button below, and if you have